Yo, what's going on, dudes and dudettes? It's your boy Innocence, and today I'm back with the God of War Ragnarok video. Tell me if you saw that one coming down below in the comments. So if you didn't already know, which honestly if you didn't, you're probably living under a rock, but God of War Ragnarok just got its first major trailer revealed about a week ago, and with it came tons of new information and details about the game. Now, I'm not really an information and details channel, well, when I don't want to be, I'm not. But this time is a little bit different, because while there are tons of reaction videos of the new trailers, there isn't that much content talking about the things or people within them. So I thought I might break the ice and give my 2 cents on some new characters that we saw in the trailers, and where exactly they fall in actual Norse mythology. I did an entire theory video on God of War Ragnarok, and producing it made me realize that the entire basis of the game runs really deep if you're looking for it. And if you haven't checked out Deciphering God of War Ragnarok, I recommend you do it after you watch this. And I know it's like my 5th time plugging in that video, but it's a really good one and I worked pretty hard on it, so if you haven't seen it yet, I'd highly recommend you check it out. Now, a bit of a warning, this video obviously contains spoilers for God of War 4, but it might also contain spoilers for Ragnarok as well. And you might be like, but Innocence, how can that be possible? Ragnarok isn't out yet. Do you have exclusive access to the game or something? Me? Exclusive access? Do you see that sub count? Trust me, I'm still a part of normal society and the only exclusive thing we get every year is taxes. Jokes aside, the reason I say that is because these games are based in Norse mythology, so it goes to reason that any events that have happened to these characters in actual Norse mythology that haven't happened in the game yet will eventually happen in one way or another. Because the newly revealed characters, all of which you're seeing on your screen now, have already had their stories written, and it's really up to the God of War writers on how they choose to represent said stories. That being said, if you don't want a general idea of what will happen to these characters in God of War Ragnarok, and you want to fly in completely blind, this probably isn't the video for you. Also, avoid googling them or reading too much because like I said, you might find something that you don't want to see. So let me give you an example of what I mean when I say quote unquote these characters have already had their stories written, just so you know that I'm not pulling your hair or anything. We can take a look at Baldur and his death at the end of God of War 4. Now, we all know that Baldur dies because he punches a mistletoe arrowhead attached to Loki's quiver that Kratos had strapped onto him earlier in the game during a field repair. And if you don't remember where Kratos got those mistletoe arrows, they were given to him in Atreus by Sindri as a gift for protecting him from that weird lightning-breathing dragon that Team Kratos fought and killed. Point being, in the game, Baldur's protection against all things oath by Freya was broken by a mistletoe arrow possessed by Loki, and then he was killed by Kratos. And remember, Freya tried her best to hide the fact that mistletoe was the spell's only weakness, even going as far as to yell at Loki for just having them in his possession. And in actual Norse mythology, Freya does the exact same thing. After she requests the oath of protection from all things, she is aware that mistletoe isn't on that list, and being the caring mother that she is, she kindly omits that detail when telling the world that her son is now invincible. But somehow, being the god of mischief, Loki finds out and crafts an arrow made entirely of mistletoe and gets Baldur's blind twin brother, and yes, you heard me correctly, Baldur has a blind twin brother and his name is Hodir, and he happens to be the god of winter. Wait a minute, god of winter? Ragnarok? Fimbulwinter? Yeah, I see what you're doing there, Santa Monica Studio, but you're not pulling one over me, and just when we thought we had enough of Baldur's crazy family, huh? Too much theorizing. We are not here to theorize. Stop it, Innocence, bad. So in actual mythology, Freya keeps Baldur's mistletoe weakness a secret, even from him, but somehow Loki finds out and tricks Baldur's blind twin brother Hodir into throwing an arrow crafted entirely from mistletoe at him, to which Baldur obviously drops dead. Now there are different versions and interpretations of that story, and I've obviously told you the most popular one, but a vastly less popular and more cynical version implies that Hodir was fully aware of what he was doing when Loki gave him the mistletoe arrow, and still threw it anyway, possibly due to some paternal attention drama. I wonder why. And if that's the version of the story Santa Monica Studio wishes to adapt, it wouldn't be hard to imagine the reason why Sindri acquired those mistletoe arrows in the first place might have directly been Hodir's doing, knowing full well that they would end up in Loki's hands and potentially rid him of Baldur. But yeah, stop theorizing, damn it! Point is, real Norse mythology, Baldur dies because of Loki and a mistletoe arrow. God of War Norse mythology, Baldur dies because of Loki and a mistletoe arrow. The events, while altered dramatically and beautifully by the God of War writing team, are roughly and undeniably the same. So that's what I mean when I say that looking at real Norse mythology will probably, in one way or another, spoil major events of the upcoming game. But if you're game, I'm game. So let's look at the first new officially revealed character. So the first character we're going to be talking about is Durlin, and the reason I decided to list him here first is because the name Durlin literally does not appear anywhere in Norse mythology. Trust me, I looked. But a popular theory floating around Reddit and other internet forums that I've gotten on board with myself is that Durlin is just an alternate spelling of Durin, who was a figure mentioned extremely briefly in the Poetic and Prose Eddas. I'm talking like a single freaking line. But an alternate translation of Durin that is slightly less popular is actually Dullin. So many believe that Santa Monica Studios simply took both modern spellings and combined them into one to imply the same individual who was being referenced. In any case, according to Norse mythology, Durlin, who was most probably Durin/Dullin, is the second dwarf to have ever been created, older than Brock, older than Sindri, older than all other dwarves in the land, except for the first one, obviously. And if we look closely at the trailer, unless these are some extremely weird camera angles, it is guaranteed that Durlin is in fact a dwarf, given how small the interior of his study looks with respect to Kratos and Atreus. And his desk is almost laughably close to the floor, which further confirms our suspicions when we see him sitting pretty comfortably in it. And speaking of the interior of his study, Durlin is old. I'm talking near the beginning of time old, so it would make sense if he was ridiculously smart or kept valuable records of events and objects over the multitude of years. So if anyone would have tons of scrolls and books scattered around, it would probably be one of the oldest beings and someone who witnessed it all happen, aka Durlin. In fact, in the trailer, it seems the only reason Kratos and Atreus visit Durlin in the first place is to try to gain a lead on the whereabouts of the Norse god of war Tyr, but according to Mimir, Tyr has been dead for a while. But I'm sure Mimir also knew the only person who might have a record stating otherwise would be Durlin, hence why they pay him a visit. Now, that's all speculation, but it gives you a small example of how Durlin's mythology may tie into the game. And fun fact, according to the myths, Durlin and the first dwarf ever made crafted an all-powerful sword called the Tyrfing. The Tyrfing?
Innocents, we do not have time for theories.
Crafted an all-powerful sword called the Tyrfing that would never miss a stroke, would never rust, and could cut through stone and iron as easily as cloth. And that's pretty much the general summary of who Durlin is and what he is known for. Of course, his roots run a lot deeper than that, like the fact that he and the first dwarf were actually forced into making the Tyrfing. But out of spite for the guilty party, the dwarves cursed the sword so that whenever it was drawn from its sheath, it would always kill a man and be the cause of quote-unquote 3 great evils. But we can't stop at every little branching part of Norse myth, otherwise this video would be like 5 hours long. So on to Tyr. Tyr is a very interesting Norse figure to explain, and believe it or not, he had a pretty significant role in God of War 4 despite not appearing as a physical character. If you paid close enough attention and took the time to find and translate a lot of the wooden murals throughout the game, you would know that Tyr is actually a reoccurring character and is depicted as being a kind god despite being a war general like Kratos. And how he ties into the myths is pretty cool. You see, it all starts with Loki's children. And yeah, you heard me correct, Loki's children. You see, in the myths, Loki is actually the father and mother of several monsters, the most important 3 being Hel, a female demigod who embodies death and watches over the realm of the same name. You could kind of think of her as the god of the underworld, except she isn't a full god. And since Loki is still a child in God of War 4, she obviously has yet to be born and was completely absent from the realm when we visited it the first time. Loki's next child is actually Jormungandr, or the World Serpent, who is very much present in the first game, but according to Mimir, the World Serpent was actually sent back in time during his cosmic battle with Thor at Ragnarok. Obviously, that doesn't happen in actual Norse myth, but it still nicely explains why the World Serpent exists when at the time, Loki has yet to father him. And fun fact, the World Serpent actually tells Mimir that he recognizes Atreus the first time he sees him, but doesn't know exactly from where. Little did he know that he was looking at a younger version of his father. And Loki's third child of relevance is actually Fenrir, or Fenris Wolf, the ever-growing wolf that eats nearly all things. And he's arguably the most important of Loki's children when it comes to explaining Tyr's lore. So Fenrir never stops growing, and in actual Norse mythology, when he was born, a set of complicated circumstances led to the gods agreeing to raise him in Asgard. And while Fenrir was but a small baby, all the gods, including Odin, refused to feed him in hopes that the wolf would never grow. So Tyr, being a kinder-hearted god than the rest, volunteered to do it himself. But once they realized just how quickly Fenrir grew in size, Odin convinced the other gods gods to restrain him in an effort to keep him from attacking. But after multiple failed attempts to tie the wolf down, Odin then requests the help of the dwarves, who after much strife were able to craft the unbreakable Gleipnir, a ribbon so impossibly strong even Fenrir could not break through it. Fenrir, ignorant of the ribbon's true potential, agreed to be bound by it on the condition that a god placed their arm into his mouth to be bitten off if for some reason he was unable to escape. And Tyr, knowing full well that they would not get a second chance to restrain the wolf and that he would certainly lose his hand, still agreed. And after Fenrir was bound and struggled to tear the ribbon, he realized that the gods had outwitted him and violently ripped a portion of Tyr's right arm away from him. And it is for this reason that Tyr is co-equally known as the one-handed god, and is always depicted as having already lost a portion of his right arm everywhere you look. But as you may have already been able to tell, in God of War Ragnarok, Tyr is shown as having both of his arms intact because Fenrir has yet to be born. And since Loki's children Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel are such massive parts of Ragnarok or the events after it, you can almost be guaranteed that we'll see them somehow or some way in the upcoming game. So I wouldn't be surprised if we actually got to see Tyr's arm get ripped off in a smooth 4K 60 FPS. Or 720/30 if you're on a base PS4. And again, that's pretty much the general idea of who Tyr is and his involvement in the Norse myths. So now let's move on to the final character of today's video, Angrboda. So Angrboda is probably going to be the easiest and quickest of the new characters to explain, since there is literally about as much material on her as there are happy League of Legends players, i.e. none. Angrboda has several mentions by Loki in the Poetic and Prose Eddas, but none of them really ever say exactly who she is or what her deal is. We get several passing details that are pretty important, all things considered, but don't really tell us much about her outside of these facts. Fact number 1, Angrboda is Loki's wife, and the mother of Loki's 3 most important children, whom we've just discussed, Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel. Fact number 2, Angrboda is a Jotun or giant and is said to preside in Jotunheim and have very little contact with Loki or their children after they've been born. Fact number 3, Angrboda, like the god of mischief, was generally considered not to be a good person. Well, you couldn't really call anyone quote unquote good or bad in the Norse myths, but that goes doubly so for Loki and Angrboda. They were essentially trolls pranking everyone for the kicks and giggles, despite the fact that it literally led to Ragnarok. Of course, I'm talking more about Loki when I say that little stint of hyperbole, but you get the point. And fact number 4, the first 3 facts are pretty much all we know, as Angrboda is rarely mentioned at all after that. She quite literally is a Norse figure shrouded in complete mystery that just wasn't very well documented or by design is elusive and intriguing. And honestly, you could totally see Santa Monica Studio leading into that theme very well with Angrboda in the trailer. I have a feeling that the writers, like every other historian, couldn't find out much about her, so they decided to use that to their advantage and potentially make her a character with quote-unquote all the answers. And that's probably why she literally tells Atreus while smiling in the most flirtatious manner possible that he'll quote-unquote have some of his answers soon and fades off into the distance. Hashtag LokiBoda. Some of these answers may include, what the hell is going on with our children? Why has Tyr been imprisoned and by whom exactly? For the love of all that is holy, how did our firstborn travel through time? How are there any giants besides me left? And the list can certainly go on. What's happening here is that we simply don't know much about Angrboda. Heck, Norse myth itself doesn't know much about Angrboda. So the writers are going to use that to their advantage and keep her shrouded in mystery. And I'm sure come up with an absolutely phenomenal way of implementing her and how she influences the story. Pretty interesting if you ask me. Oh, and I did contemplate talking a little bit about Thor since he's technically a new character, but I didn't want to bore everyone since popular media has already explained much of the basis of his mythology already, and I'm sure most of you guys have probably seen a Marvel movie at least once in your life. One thing I will say about him, however, is that no gods in Norse mythology are actually how popular media depicts them. The version of Thor depicted by Santa Monica Studio is much closer to the description, albeit with a very grounded in reality and non-appealing take, and overall I think he perfectly fits the theme of the game. You know, Thor does some pretty bad stuff in Norse myth as well and is often referenced as a very sturdy man, but popular media usually chooses not to show that. All in all, a pretty cool trailer and even cooler characters, so let me know what you guys think in the comment section, and don't forget to check out my God of War Ragnarok theory down in the description. But with that being said, ladies and gents, if you liked the video, leave a like. If you disliked it, dislike, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a future upload on the channel. Oh, and hit that bell notification button if you're so inclined. I've been Innocence, you've been the audience, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.